Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Scott Stedman podcast. I hope you are having a great Christmas and also a great New Year's as well. Um, so joining us today is my co-host Micah Current. Micah, how's life been for you?
Uh, Crazy, but in a good way. I
Crazy,
mean,
but in a good way.
the holidays, everything's crazy, and people are trying to get places and planning things and trying to get with all the family and try to enjoy time off and you know, having a baby, all those things.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's just been crazy. I know I'm traveling a bunch from Central Ohio to Northeast Ohio. Then I'm heading out to Florida at the beginning of the year for Children's Pastors Conference. Also, when I turned 40, my wife, we went out to DC and got to spend my 40th out there. So, kind of doing a big 40th getaway for Laura since she turned 40 in September, but haven't had the opportunity to do anything. So, I'm taking her out to Florida with me for a few days, and then she'll be flying back so she can start teaching again. Um, but yeah, so today we're going to talk about an interesting topic. Again, I've been working on my doctorate, talking about different transitions that happen in churches from leadership transitions. And one of the things that I find so fascinating, especially within churches and whether they're local churches or Christian denominations or nonprofits, is just how there doesn't seem to be a good segue of transitions from the older generation to the younger generation. And I don't necessarily think it's a church issue. I think it's just a cultural issue. I was thinking about this because I know I read the article that they were, and Micah, you might have to help me remember, because I don't know all the terminology. But when AOC was kind of looking to kind of be the head of the Democratic Party with their negotiations, everything, and Nancy Pelosi, who suffered a injury in overseas, decided to text or email or do something from her hospital bed basically saying, no, let's not have AOC kind of be this person who, again, is a younger Democrat. Let's have this older guy be kind of the voice of the Democratic Party in these negotiations or whatnot. And again, I don't know all the lingo of it, but then eventually it got to the point where everybody voted for this older gentleman, and AOC kind of got out. And just kind of watching that whole thing unfold and even kind of AOC's response, where she's still kind of being like a team player. But the fact that we had somebody who couldn't be in a position of power anymore use whatever power they had to send emails to prevent from a younger person to be in a position of power really speaks volumes to kind of what we've been kind of things that you and I've been talking about that we've seen in the church, where it seems like a lot of these younger ministers can't seem to move up the ladder or within their churches or within the denomination in which they serve, because there seems to be kind of this kind of almost like this gatekeeping in some ways when it comes to leadership. So kind of, Michael, what are kind of some of your what are kind of like some of your impressions about about just younger leaders trying to move up and feeling like that they can't because everything's being so guarded by the older generation?
I have a lot I could say, but I think that some of the ideas that pop into my head right off the bat are the excuses that the older generation give you, such as you don't have the experience, you don't have the education. And so what do? You go out there and get more education. And then you come back and you're like, well, you don't have the experience. Okay. You go out there and get the experience, you come back and it's like, well, not quite ready to retire yet. We're past the baton or have any sort of contingency plan. So just sit tight. And so, like, why do you have all these situations or contingencies on what it's going to take for you to get involved? And I've seen it time and time again in churches where all these younger leaders have a lot of great insight and a lot of great wisdom, not saying that the older generation doesn't, but they don't let the younger generation either help or let them be involved with any sort of planning or contingency moving forward as sort of like, okay, this is the next step in the progression. And it's crazy. You see it everywhere. I think it's a boomer thing, right? Like you see it in politics. You just mentioned Nancy Pelosi, who is 83 years old, by the way. And I don't know how old AOC is. I think she's like 33, 34,
Mm-hmm.
something. But like, don't necessarily agree with their politics, but like, it's insane how a generation has gained all this control and they don't want to give it up. And I'm not saying give it up like, oh, I have to have all the power because I'm the younger generation and I'm more educated than you. And, it's my turn now. But like, it's almost like they're not giving it up and they're not relinquishing it.
Yeah. And, when I've, in all of my research, just looking at just church transitions, one of the things that you mentioned already was is kind of a big contribute is they're not willing to let go of power. And not necessarily power per se, but they're not willing to let go of the ministry that they've helped kind of build up. Um, and what I've seen or what I've read is that there's always like a pastor who kind of feels like they're ready to retire, so they go and they tell their board, okay, I'm ready to retire. So they start kind of moving in the motions. They start going through all this stuff. They start doing kind of like if they have a succession plan, they start moving forward with that, or they start trying to find the next person to be the next leader, pastor of the church. And then all of a sudden, it's almost like there's that second wind where they're like, you know what? I think I could do this for a couple more years. And then it starts to kind of derail everything. And because then you either, if you're a board and the pastor's like, hey, I don't think I'm going to retire. I think I want to stick around for a couple more years. Then as a board, you're now going to have to think, okay, either we just have to tell the person that we are going to hire, sorry, pastor changed his mind. B, try to find a budget to have two pastors on board. Or C, you're going to have to tell the pastor saying, sorry, you already said retired. We're already moving forward with this plan and we got to go. Um, and from that, that could lead to, hurt feelings. It can lead to resentment. It can lead to just kind of, you know, whoever start kind of setting up a coup or setting up the mob to kind of start causing issues and problems. And we always start to see that there becomes a downgrade within churches because the transition didn't go smoothly. Um, Even reading things about the Bob Iger, Bob Chapek drama when Bob Chapek became the CEO of Disney, like it was almost like he came in and instead of Bob moving out of his office, the bigger office, he said, well, I'm going to keep my office. So Bob Chapek at the smaller office, even though he's the CEO. And it seemed like there was a lot of micromanaging happening. And all of a sudden it got to the point where the board was not happy. So they told Bob CPEC, you're gone. And then Bob Iger's now the CEO, even though Bob Iger's like, well, I do want to retire. And it's like, well, you just obviously you want to retire, but obviously you're doing stuff that really didn't really paint the picture that you want to retire. Like you didn't take the smaller office. You didn't, you're still kind of having your fingers in all the project, even though you probably should have less than if there was some type of overlap succession plan that was happening. And you see this all the time. And I think a lot of it is just because if you've been at a company for so long and that has been your life, and all of a sudden you're now giving it up, and there is almost like that fear of is things going to be okay when I go, which kind of goes back to our topic of ego that we talked about a couple weeks ago. Um, Also, I think there's also this kind of a point where we really see um, we really see people be very possessive of their stuff or their positions. And I think that's kind of exactly what's happening. I mean, the fact that Nancy Pelosi can't be the Speaker of the House anymore, not that she can't, but she says, well, I don't want to do it anymore because she's, in her upper 80s. But the fact that she's still able to have those network connections to be able to make things happen really kind of shows that everything at the top is gatekeeped. And if you're not willing to allow younger leaders to kind of help bring more ideas and more stuff into the fold to kind of help a business or to help a country or to even help a ministry, then you kind of get to that point where, and I think this is kind of what we're seeing in churches where there's a lot of less young people who really want to be involved in ministry because they can't get up any higher because the older generation is not willing to pass the baton and take a step back and allow the younger leaders to lead. Um, I wasn't it you, Micah, that sent me or actually, I think I saw it too, where they had the search committee for who was going to find the general director for Ohio Ministries, and you look at everybody, and there's like nobody under the age of 50
45, I think.
or 45. Like there's not a lot of younger people who are sitting on it. The majority are people who are definitely older ministers who are probably on the cusp of retiring themselves as well.
Well, I think another piece of it is money and greed.
Oh, I think so too. Or if
Whether
it's
you want to
not
admit
money,
that or not.
well, and I wouldn't even necessarily, if it's not money or greed, but maybe it's just the lack of retirement
Control,
planning.
control or power.
Yeah. Well, even, I mean, my dad's company, I mean, there's times where he will talk about, and his company works differently. But there's been times where he's noticed where they've had to like try to buy people out of the company because even though they were retired, but since they had ownership in the company, they still got to make some decisions. So even when there's some big like decisions that need to be made for the future of the company, sometimes they would say no, either A, because they don't like the direction it's going, so they don't want to grow as a company, even though they're not working for the company anymore. But then the same thing, greed. Oh, you're going to buy it out for this, but I want a bigger cut. If we're gonna merge our company with someone else, or we're gonna buy another company, I want a bigger cut. And it's like, but you're retired. You're only taking a smaller portion now. You're not getting made as much as when you were a full time employee. You're now a retired partner, so you kind of have to do what's best for everyone else and have our young leaders run it and stuff. And it was kind of this thing where it's like, okay, well, we now have to write up a package to try to buy this person out because they're starting to pull the company down of not only from a leadership perspective, but even from a financial perspective as well.
Yeah, and I think too that, you know, in higher ed, it's a little bit different. Oh, like you put your 30 years in and then you're done. But what Alicia and I've noticed over the past couple of years is there's people here that have been here 30, 32, 35, 38, 40 years. And the company that does our retirement will oftentimes, and we've noticed this more over the last couple of years, will say, Scott Stedman, you have 28 years in, and we're going to buy you out.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning that you can retire early and you can have your full retirement
Yeah.
because you've
Yeah.
given 28 years.
Yeah. And I know that especially like when there's economic turmoil, that's what happened to my father-in-law. Like it was like he was kind of like, oh, hey, you've worked so many years here. we need you to, we need to kind of have you retire to help because you've put so many years and and maybe they're like 2 years away from retiring, but they're like, here, we'll give you the full retirement and everything else if you retire now. They're like, okay, yeah, I'll do that. So they did. Um, and yeah, so I think I mean, in the other, I think what's hard though, and this is the thing that I think irks me the most about this topic is that when I was a teen and I'm growing up and I go to youth conventions or youth camps, so much messaging. We need younger ministers. We need this younger generation to rise up to be ministers, to do ministry because a lot of us are old and retiring and we don't have anyone else to take our spots. Right? So we need young ministers to step up. Okay. And I know there's a lot of students who felt that call, who rose up to the occasion, whether it was a calling from God or they were just motivated by emotion and drive to go into ministry and to do all that. And then they get into ministry and they just feel like they're just still, like you said, they want to move up and they're being told, well, you're not old enough or you don't have enough experience. Or, I mean, I still think of the one church who, when I first got ordained, there's a church that I'm like, ooh, I would apply to that church because I know people there. It's a church that I think was probably it was a pretty fairly good sized church. Like they definitely had multiple staff on there. Um, and I was told, well, you would never get that position because you're not old enough. They want someone who wants like 15, 20 years experience. Okay. And now this church that used to draw in thousands of people on a Sunday had about I think had a Saturday service, 3 Sunday morning services that had probably like 2 or 3 campuses, has now been, I don't know how to say it, but they keep hiring older people or people who fit that criteria of being 15, 20 years of experience. And they have driven that church to the ground where now they're only averaging 300 people a Sunday. And if you get to a church, how do you get? And now I'm not saying if a younger person was in there that wouldn't have happened. We don't know. But the fact that they weren't willing to take a chance on the David, they're only taking a chance of the older brothers.
Yeah.
Let's have the older brothers lead us because they're older, they know more, they do everything else, and yet not realizing that sometimes, and again, it's not necessarily about knowledge, it's not about wisdom, but I think younger pastors have a better grip on kind of the pulse of the culture and how the Christian faith can really speak to the culture to really transform the culture. So whether that has to do with practice, whether that has to do with theology, or whether that just has to do with certain ministries, like, hey, this ministry is not really benefiting our community now because our community has changed. Like I remember I got contacted from a church in San Antonio, Texas, asking me if I'd be interested in being their pastor. And I remember sitting and talking with these people and just curiosity, I just asked them, go, well, tell me a little bit about. And they said, they sold some land because they had a large property that they don't use. They sold some land for development. And they also said that they've had a high volume of Hispanic Hispanic people moving into the community where before it was mostly predominantly white. Now it's almost like 50-50, maybe 60-40 now, more dominant on the Hispanic side. And I remember having that conversation. I sat back and talked about it. And again, it was good. It was a full-time job, had benefits, um, had a place for me to stay. I mean, we would have to be living in Texas, so I know that was far from all our family up north. So, that was kind of a point. But I really thought about it and go, I think what would benefit, I don't think I would be a good pastor at this church. Not because of theological differences, not because of personality, not because of age, but because the community has shifted so much. It would be good to find someone who is bilingual, or even find a pastor who maybe is Hispanic too, to be able to speak to this population, this growing population in this community that is changing rapidly. Or even if they had the money, maybe have two pastors, hire a do co-pastors or a lead and an associate, and have one of the pastors be Mexican, or be and that would probably benefit the community better. And for me, and again, I'm not young anymore. I mean, I'm still youngish, but I'm not as young anymore. And but I could see that and go, that's going to be a better fit. If they could do that, that's really going to make that church pop. Where if I was an older pastor, if I was in my 60s or 70s, I'd probably say, yeah, I'll take it. Or no, go somewhere else. But I remember talking to him. I said, hey, here's some things that I thought of. And I gave him some suggestions just to see, hey, if this, I prayed about it. Here's some things that came up there in my prayer time. Maybe this might be beneficial to you. I don't know if they took my advice or not, but I felt like I was able to help out, even though I didn't take the position, and was able to some services. And I felt like they even valued my wisdom and kind of my observation on based on the information they told me. And I think that's kind of the big deal is, if we continue to suppress the generation that's coming up, I don't want to have to be the guy, the 60-year-old guy at a summer camp with kids telling them, hey, we need young ministers to be in the ministry because when I retire, we're not going to have anybody left to take my place. I don't want to be that guy. I don't want to be that guy. I want to just be able to say, hey, I'm getting older. I think a younger pastor might be a good fit for here. And then I'm going to bow out gracefully and let the next generation do their thing. And keep my mouth shut and get out of the way. If there's something that I think might be problems, I may talk about it. I may do it with grace and dignity. But at the end, I have to come to realization it's not my baby anymore. It's not my ministry anymore. It's someone else's. So I'm going to get there and support them and do the best I can to support them and give them the best opportunity for them to grow. And that's what I'm going to have to do. And I think when older ministers are able to make that connection and are able to do that, you're really going to see the church thrive in many ways when we're able to relinquish the power that we have been given, and now we need to give it back.
Makes you wonder what the generation before them did. You know what I mean?
That's a
Like,
good question.
yeah, like how did they handle it? And why are they being the way they are now if their parents, did or did not do that? Or did they learn that from their parents?
I don't know, because anytime when you talk about the builder generation, which would have been, I don't know if they would have been the parents of boomers, the builder generation, or if that's the generation between boomers and that early like World War I generation type people. I don't know, because I almost feel like, again, people didn't live as long back then too. And I don't know if it's a thing where you're living longer, so now you're really worried about retirement, because it's like, oh, do I have, I mean, my dad even said the same thing one time. He said he was worried if he had enough money for retirement. And I'm thinking, because cost of everything's going up, and I'm thinking, Dad, you have money in endowments and trust and savings and in retirement and all these places. Plus, when you retire, he's already through his retirement thing, but when officially his last day of work's done, he still owns a small percentage of the company. So anytime when there's big sales that happen in the company, he's going to be getting a little bit of a kickback as well. And he's still going to have some influence on the board of just kind of where it's going to go next until someone buys him out or until he decides, hey, I want to be gone. So buy me out, buy my shares out. But, you know, I think it's just that mentality of people who want more will continue to want more. And people who didn't plan for the future, when they finally get done and they realize I don't have enough money to retire on, I'm going to be like 90 years old flipping burgers at McDonald's because I have nothing to do, then you're going to have to think about, then I think that's kind of the fear of bad financial planning or not really knowing how much you can have. You just want to hold on to the reins a little bit more. You're not willing to let go. It's almost like that. And plus, I think when you get older, change is scarier. I think, the fact that I was able to, I don't know, I think the fact that I was able to get married, work at camp, switch, work in Youngstown, work in Virginia. And when my time in Virginia was done, there was a part of me that was like, I don't know what to do. I don't know where I'm going. And I'm kind of afraid a little bit of what's going to happen. Because I mean, I have kids now. And again, I'm thinking about, what's going to happen to my career? What's going to happen to my wife's career? Where are my kids going to go to school? So I think as I get older, as a parent, there's certain things where I'm not as open to change as I once was. Now that I'm in a place where I'm very secure, like, the fact that I'm going to have a title change within the church and kind of get a little bit, I guess it's more of a title change. I won't necessarily say it's a promotion, but the fact that I'm going to be doing other stuff that's different, that's going to work within my skill set, like, cool, that's great. Am I sad that I'm not going to be doing certain ministries anymore? Yeah. But at the same time, if the church feels that this is going to be see my skills and think that this is going to be a better way for me to really help impact the church, then I'm for the change. Um, but yeah, like I don't know if it's just the idea of giving up because then it's a change. And if you've been at a church or you've been ministering or pastoring for 40 some years and now you're retired and you don't know what to do with yourself, then that could be an issue too. Like, I don't know, Mike. I don't know the reason for why people tend to hold on as much as they do when they know they need to let go.
Yeah, I mean, it could be a plethora of reasons, but at the same time, it doesn't justify or make any, give them the credence to leave us out of it, if that makes sense. And, you know, us being the next generation, because it's like, believe it or not, we still have families to provide for. We still have to make a living and we still have to make a retirement so that we can retire one day. It's kind of how the circle of life goes, Mufasa. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
It
Absolutely.
it's really a struggle, to be honest with you. And again, I don't know the answer, but it's just, I think it's evident more now than ever as we are, getting a little bit older. And our parents are definitely reaching that age of retiring themselves.
Yeah. Oh, goodness. Oh, goodness. Well, I don't know. And, hopefully, I mean, it'll be interesting to see especially within the Church of God, especially with the Church of God, is just very curious to see how how the new director, both Ohio associate director, and even the general director, how that conversation is going to go. Are we going to have somebody who's going to be younger, or is it still going to be kind of someone who's older and we're just still going to continue to run into these same challenges and issues? So I'm not sure. I'm not sure. So, oh goodness. Anyway, so friends, tell us what you think. Like, are you a younger pastor who feels like you can't get ahead within your denomination because you feel like there's some gatekeepers that's preventing you from rising up the ladder? Are you someone who doesn't have that issue and you feel like you're in a place where, even though you have different generations and different opinions, everybody's free to speak, everyone leads equally, and you're doing good? We would love to hear what you all have to say. But until then, thank you guys so much for listening to the Scott Stedman podcast. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and we'll be back on soon. Take care. Thank you for listening to the Scott Stedman podcast. The Scott Stedman podcast is made possible by support from our listeners. We thank listeners like Patty and Scott, whose support goes to this podcast's continual growth and maintenance. If you want to support this podcast, you can do so in a number of ways. First, feel free to give us a 5-star rating if you enjoyed this episode and share it with your friends. If you'd like to financially support the Scott Stedman podcast, you can go to the website ko-fi.com/the Scott Stedman podcast. That website again is ko-fi.com/the Scott Stedman podcast. Thank you so much for listening.